In this short presentation, I would like to present to you my new book, Just Reasonable Multiculturalism. The book will be published soon, 2021, by Cambridge University Press. I will say some more about the cover that you just seen. Let me explain how it all started. So my journey in researching multiculturalism started in 1992. I returned to Israel after 4 years in Oxford, where I was doing my DPhil in politics on a very different subject matter, the boundaries of liberty and tolerance. And the person who opened his arms to me and embraced me when I returned to Israel after 4 years abroad was Yehuda Elkanah. Yehuda at the time was the president of the very prestigious Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. And he said, come to Van Leer, check it around, see what we are doing. There are various research projects that are going on. Join one or two of them. So this is exactly what I've done. I surveyed all the research groups, visited them, listened into their conversations and discussions. And at the end, I decided to join the European project that studied cultural influences between Europe, Israel, and Palestine. And it was quite an unusual project because usually Jews and Palestinians, Israeli Palestinians, Israeli Jews, do not meet with each other. And in this group that was sponsored by the Volkswagen Foundation, it was a mix of Palestinians and Jews, and also two Germans who happened to be in the country at that time. So I've been studying multiculturalism for many, many years, as I said, from 1993. What particularly prompted the writing of this book are claims, recent claims that have been made. Some have longer histories, some are rather new. So the older claims are that multiculturalism is bad for women because usually when you uphold group rights, those who have to pay the price are women. The other argument, again, that has long roots is that multiculturalism is bad for democracy. And the newer argument that came about is that multiculturalism promotes terrorism, no less. So I decided to look and investigate these three questions, whether it's true that multiculturalism is so bad. And of course, a relevant question is to what extent group rights are related to individual rights. Because if you want to promote democracy, of course, enable democracy, the individual is in the center of everything. What happens when there's a clash between individual rights and group rights? How do they relate to each other? And what should we do if group rights come into conflict with individual rights? And the $69 million questions, when should liberal democracy interfere in illiberal practices of its cultures within liberal democracies? Because liberal democracy is reluctant to interfere. When should they interfere? The thesis that I put forward in the book is that multiculturalism and liberal democracy can be reconcilable. It is possible to secure the so-called Aristotelian golden mean between multiculturalism and liberalism. This is provided that the mechanisms for reconciliation are just and reasonable. So let me run through the table of contents of the book and say a few words about each section, if you like. I'm starting with a flow chart that shows the logic, the reasoning behind the entire project. And after the introduction in part 1, I'm starting to outline the theory. The theory of just reasonable multiculturalism has 4 components. First, I explain what is justice, and I explain what is liberal democracy. Then I'm speaking about what is reasonable and explain what is multiculturalism. And then I look into 2 concepts that are very pertinent and important for this discussion. One is compromise, because in liberal democracy, we would like to create bridges when it is possible. And I propose all kinds of mechanisms of compromise. And being an advocate of Habermas' deliberative democracy, I think this is the right way to go. And then I look also at the concept of coercion, because if liberal democracy would like to interfere in illiberal practices of cultures within liberal democracy, then coercion is involved. Coercion, of course, is not a good word. It's not a good term. We all do not like to be coerced, but sometimes it is necessary. We do pay taxes. We are called upon by the state to perform all kinds of tasks. In some countries, there's a draft to serve in the army. In other countries, you have to go to have a jury duty. So there are certain things, of course, that are coercive. Laws are, to a large extent, coercive. To what extent we can invoke coercion and when. After explaining the theoretical framework, then I go and apply the theory to applications. And the next part is concerning with interference in minority affairs when physical harm is done to certain individuals. And I'm starting with the clear cases, murder for family honor. I think it's a clear case in which most of us would not object to interference when a culture does such a thing. And I'm speaking about tradition, I speak about the concept of honor, and I speak about female circumcision, female genital mutilation, the practice of scarring. And then I move to discuss male circumcision in the name of tradition and good health. To what extent we should interfere with this practice of male circumcision that is so important in Judaism, in Islam, and in some parts of the Christian world. It is a practice, a ritual practice in which all the family is gathered for an event that is perceived as a milestone in the life of individuals of certain cultures. Part 3 is about interference in minority affairs when there is no physical harm, but still there is harm. And here I'm speaking about discrimination of women and apostates when it comes to denying certain people, women, education, denying them land, denying them representation, coercing them against their will to do certain tasks. And then I discussed the denying education to children, specifically to the Amish children in the United States. So that's a case study that I'm looking at very, very closely. The last part of the book is concerned with 2 countries. So these are 2 country case studies. One is France, where the multiculturalism concept is seemingly received by certain people in France as something that negates security. And I speak about, a chapter that is behind the French veil of ignorance, because there's a lot of ignorance there in some of the claims that people are making. I explain how the French reasoning has been consolidated since the French Revolution. And I explain the differences between the hijab, the niqab, and the burqa, differences that many French people are not aware of, which is staggering. They just call it foulard or voile, and that's it. So it's just one word. The veil encompasses all forms of dress, hijab, the niqab, and burqa. And you can see for yourself, of course, that there are differences between the 3. And then the last chapter of the book, again, security considerations are perceived as contradictory to multiculturalism. And this is the Israeli discrimination of its Arab Palestinian citizens. I chose this book cover because it shows the old wall of Jerusalem at dusk. It's one of the most beautiful scenes that you can see, but it's also very, very symbolic, because there is a wall between cultures in Israel, between religion in Israel, and we need to overcome this wall and then see the light. And I claim that it is possible to do that, but it takes, goodwill and quite an effort to bridge between different cultures in society. I dedicate the book to three people. One is Yuda Elkanah, because thanks to him, I embarked on this project. The second is Biko Parek, who read all the chapters of the book, commented on the book, and was always a source of inspiration to me in studying multiculturalism. And the third is Will Kimlicka, again, a very inspirational figure in the study of multiculturalism. I've been studying Will's writings for a very long time. We co-authored an article together that was published in several forms. And I always consult and consider his writings on multiculturalism very, very closely. So I dedicate this book to them. I want to end this short presentation by looking at some of the endorsement that the book received from several learned people in the world. And you can read these endorsements to yourself. I just run them through. So this is from Biko. This is from Jeff Levy from Australia. He also read the entire manuscript and provided comments on the book. Stephen Newman from York University in Canada did the same, and this is his endorsement. And Alan Jacobs from New York, this is his endorsement, and you can see that he's coming from a very different field of study. Thank you very much.